Okay folks, now what we are going to talk about are materials, and we introduced you to the concept of materials in the intro course. So on the Manage tab you can find materials. Now for about 5 years this is the way materials have worked in Revit. So inside the materials dialog box here, you're going to see 4 tabs, actually 5 tabs, but there's 4 that are of serious importance. So let's see here, I'll choose something that's got a few more tabs on it here. Let's do concrete. Okay, actually, you know, the best one to do it is brick. Let me just pull up brick here. Now, bricks hatches are on its graphics tab. So any particular material that you have in your project, you're going to have several tabs, depending if their assets have been added for that material. So looking at the top of page 6 for our notes, when you have a material, it can have up to 4 assets that are part of that material's definition. So on the left, you've got all your list of materials, and on the right, on different tabs, you can have all of these extra assets. Now, pretty much every asset, or pretty much every Revit material that you see on the left will have a graphics tab and an appearance tab. So the graphics tab is just to deal with its hatches when it's being shown in plan or in elevation. So with brick, you've got the regular, 4x8 hatch in elevation, and then a diagonal hatch when you cut through it in section. Now, with your appearance asset, as we told you folks in the intro course, what an appearance asset is, it's just a digital picture of a material that's been photoshopped, so it can be applied ad infinitum across the face of a wall. So with bricks, for instance, you'd probably notice that there's a part of the brick that repeats every once in a while, and so these appearance assets, some of them are good, some of them are a little corny looking, and that's the stuff that we're going to focus mostly on tonight. Now, a few things about this materials dialog box. In the top left, you've got the materials that are in your project. On the bottom left, you've got materials that are from the software's own internal library. So these materials down at the bottom here may or may not be in your project, and if you want to add one of them to your project, you just click the little up arrow here, and it adds that material to your project very, very quickly. Now, when you bring a material from the software library into your project, it brings in all of its assets. So it brings in any graphics assets, appearance, and then physical and thermal. Now, what we're really going to focus on here tonight are these appearance assets. So you have your list of Revit materials. So a material includes all of its assets, but what you also have is a much larger library of appearance assets. So like I said, an appearance asset is just a digital picture, generally speaking, plus some other little tweaks that are done to it to make it look like a real world material. So to access this greater library of appearance assets, on the appearance tab, you go and you hit this button right here. Now what this does is it opens up sort of a secondary library within the software where you can search for a different appearance for one of the materials that you've defined. Wow, I don't know where it went. There we go. So if I type in brick as a search term at the top, what Revit will show me are all of the different rendered appearances of brick that are available out of the box library. So when I say out of the box, these two folders at the bottom are sets of rendered appearances for brick, and you can click on one library and then you can kind of drill down and find what all of these different things look like. And if you see one that appeals, so here I go to masonry and then brick, you know, if there's one of these rendered appearances for brick that I like, I can click one of them and hit this little double arrow on the right hand side, and now this appearance asset gets added to my project. So here are, you've got this yellow brick now, which is going to be used to render cord brick whenever that material is built into one of my wall types. Now, generally speaking, each of your Revit materials is going to have its own separate appearance asset. So that means, you know, each one of these materials in the list has its own corresponding appearance asset. Now sometimes you can have more than one Revit material, so you could have two Revit materials that are using the same appearance asset. And if that's the case, so here brick cord is using uniform running yellow. So here I can pick masonry brick, and I can say to masonry brick, instead of using this red brick that it's using right now, I can replace it with, I'll just go up to the top here and choose from my document assets. So these are appearance assets that are in my currently open project. So here I'll put in brick. So there's that uniform yellow brick, right? So now what's happening is I have two of my Revit materials, brick cord and masonry brick, that are sharing a single appearance asset. Now that's a little weird. And the reason it's weird is that most of the time you define another material so that it will render differently, right? So it'll have a different look when you render it. So if you have done that, if you have more than one material that's using one appearance asset, Revit puts a little one by the hand to let you know how many other Revit materials are using this same appearance. Again, this isn't a big deal, but generally speaking, you probably want to have a separate appearance for each one of your Revit materials. So I can just go back here to my masonry brick, and I'll type in brick into the search term. So I can search for appearance assets that have already been loaded into my project and use those. Now, maybe one of the things you might be wondering is, how much overhead do these appearance assets add to my project? So whenever I go down to these lists down here, and I find a different appearance asset, and I add it to my project, like this one here, I've added uniform running gray, this appearance asset, I've added it to my project. So now it's up here in my document assets. So anytime you add one of these appearance assets, it gets tossed into the library in your project. It's not really much overhead at all. It's quite minimal, in fact, because all of the pictures that you see here for this brick, they're already shipped with the software anyway. There's thousands of pictures of different materials that come with the software. So if you've got all these extra appearance assets in your project, it's no big deal. Now what can happen over time, of course, is that you may have added appearance assets to your project, but you're not actually using them, right? So I could add this appearance asset for gray brick into my project and then come back later and go, no, I don't want to use gray brick at all. But this appearance asset is still kind of kicking around in the background of your database. So if you want to punt that stuff out of there, you can go to the Manage tab and go over to Purge. So in this dialog box, down at the bottom here, material assets, appearance assets. So these are all of the different appearance assets that aren't pointing to any particular material in this project. So that means I hit check none. Holy smoke. I have 113 appearance assets that aren't connected to any of the materials in my project. Is it a big deal? Not really. What advantages is there to purging them out? Well, it just means that it's not going to make your file size smaller, really. Again, you're not really adding much in terms of overhead to your project. It just means now that when you go into the materials dialog box, and when you're looking at one of your materials here and you go to appearance and hit replace up here on the at the top here, it just means that the number of document assets that you see up here when you click on this part of the asset browser is reduced. So there's just simply fewer materials here, material assets in my project to scroll through. Again, not a big deal at all. Now, if you're starting from scratch with a material, so let's go over to page 8. Now, oftentimes, you have a very specific product in mind that you want to use. Carpet tile, carpets.
Sorry, I was going to say, I have a client who wants his house to be like white stucco. Like, where on the list is stucco?
Sure. So if I want to add stucco as a material, so I'll use that as an example right now. I'll put stucco up here in the list. And I don't see stucco in my, oh I do, but there's also stucco down here in the out-of-the-box library. Now I'm going to leave this blue stucco as it is, and I'm going to bring this white stucco up. So now it's added stucco to my Revit project here. And so now there's the appearance of stucco that I'm going to get when this material is shown on the outside of my building. So here I'm going to switch to walls. Not sure why it's not rendering it yet. Oh, there we go. So you can see that we've got a bit of a color here, so we could change the color that we want for the stucco. So if you want it to be more of a white color, it's going to increase the brightness of it there. And so most of your materials, and we're going to get into this now, you've got an original digital picture, plus you have what's called a bump or a relief. Now you can see here this file that you see below, there's the original file plus the bump. The bump is a grayscale image, and where it's white, it's at the surface, and the darker it gets in this grayscale image, the more recessed back into the wall it becomes. So you have this digital image to begin with, which would simply look like wallpaper if you didn't do anything different. So let me just illustrate here. Now I'm just going to make this preview a little bigger. Now you folks can see there's a little bit of a roughness that is shown on this cube with this material, and that comes from this bump. So at the time of render, Revit roughens up the surface to make it look like, you know, like there's some sand and rock that's in the stucco. If this bump was not used, you'd get this very flat appearance like wallpaper. Now it won't be so pronounced with this kind of a material on the outside of a building, but with something like brick, the bump pattern will make the mortar joints appear to be recessed, and you'll actually see shadows where the mortar joints are placed because of this bump pattern. Now, for those of you who do interior design or you have a specific finish that you want to use, One of the things that you need to do first of all is to get a really good digital picture of the material that you want to use. Now, one example that I'm just going to use here is cultured stone. Now, cultured stone over the years has had a product called StoneCAD, and with StoneCAD they provided digital pictures of all of their different stone products, and these were digital pictures that you could use for rendering purposes. So that means that this particular image right here, you can see this rock here on the left, here's the other piece of it here on the right. So it means that this whole image tiles vertically and horizontally perfectly. The only problem is you'd see this big rock on every square. So you'd see that big rock here, and here, and here, and here, and it would just repeat. So sometimes these textures can end up looking, when you render it, it can look a little bit repetitive. So sometimes you might want to choose another stone pattern that's maybe less obvious in terms of how it's going to look on the outside of the building. But if the client really wants, or your designer really wants to use this kind of stone, then unless you find a different digital picture of this stone product, you're kind of stuck with seeing this rock, you know, every 4 feet on the outside of your building. Now, to make this rendering look realistic, you have to do one more step. You have to get the original color photograph, and in Photoshop or GIMP turn it into a grayscale image, and then punch up the contrast as necessary so you increase the amount of shadowing that you get on the outside. And then when you define the material or the appearance asset in Revit, you say that this is your original image and this is the bump or the relief pattern that when you render it creates these recesses. So we're going to go through this process right now together, and then you folks will be able to do this on your own in the future. Okay, so I'm just going to start with the architectural template here, and I recommend that you do the same. Okay, so we're on page 8. We're going to go through this exercise here. So going to the Manage tab and choosing Materials. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start from scratch, creating a new material from scratch and creating a new appearance asset for that material. Now, down in the bottom corner here, where there's this little gray sphere, and if you click on it, you can choose to create a new material. So, bottom left corner, click the little gray sphere in the material browser. Revit gives this new material called Default New Material. Manage tab and then Materials. Far left. All right, so you got this new material called Default New Material. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to rename it straight away. So I'm going to call this Cultured Stone. Right click on it, rename it, call it Cultured Stone. Now, when you add a new material from scratch to your project, not only does Revit add the material for it, it will also create an appearance tab for it and a new appearance asset. Now, you can see that the appearance asset itself doesn't have a whole lot going for it. It's just flat gray. So our option at this point is to just simply roll with this asset, or we could try and find another one inside Revit's asset library that's a little closer to the mark than what we have here. Now, anytime you create this new material, Revit creates probably one of the most complicated bits of settings here that's possible for a material. Now I want you folks to notice all of the different settings that are available here for this new material that we've created and the new appearance asset that Revit created for the new material. Compare all these settings to copper. Copper is a lot simpler. Looking at concrete. Now it's kind of more complicated, but copper is quite simple. Now, how do we get these particular settings made available to us if we don't want to use the one that Revit creates by default when we add a new material? Well, the answer to that is by replacing this appearance asset with one that we might find in the list here. So I'm going to look for stone. So what I want to do is find a new appearance asset in Revit's appearance asset library. So I'm going to go down to stone here. And you can see this one down here, small, even, rectangular stone. I think there's another one in the field stone uncoursed. I actually mentioned it in the notes because it amused me that they actually spelt it wrong. I think they fixed it. That'd be good. I'm just quickly breezing through the list here to see if I can find it. If you folks look on page 8 in step 4, we're clicking in the search field at the top of the dialog, and we've typed in stone, and I think what they've done is they've got rid of the uncoursed field stone. I'm just quickly looking for it here. What do they call it? Field stone. I should actually be able to use field stone at the top here and find it. Oh. Yes. Look. So what this is, that's spelt wrong. When you're talking about coursing stone, it's uncoursed means the opposite of fine. But when you're coursing stone, it's C-O-U-R-S-E. So that's a misspelling in the software. Regardless, I'm going to use this appearance asset in my project. Now look what happens. When I switched out that appearance asset, it gave me the same ones. What I want to find here was one that has a simpler appearance asset. Just give me a second here and we'll grab one. Okay, I've got one. Folks, if you type in stone at the top under the Autodesk Physical Assets folder, go down to stone and you'll find one that's called unfinished. So this is a much simpler set of settings to define how a material renders. What these are called are procedures. So the original appearance asset that we brought in gave you the deluxe set of what we call procedures. So here the procedure means take an original image, then make it bumpy, then render it. Now, that other appearance asset that was in there had stuff for reflectivity and self-illumination and a whole bunch of other stuff that stone doesn't really need. It's not a big deal if it's in there or not. It's just easier to redefine this than it is to define that original generic one that was added to our new material when we created it from scratch. So you'll often see a different set of procedures depending on the material that you choose. Now, of course, with a lot of these materials, we're not interested in how they render. This one's just paint. And it affects how it renders, just, whether it's brushed on or sprayed on or rollered on. You'll see those different settings for paint. So paint is a very simple set of procedures. So if you have a new material, like our stone, and you go up to the appearance asset, and you bring in a paint asset for your stone, you get this very simple set of procedures. So, just so you know, there's about 6 or 7 different kinds of procedures. There's ones for glass, there's ones for water, there's ones for fabric, there's ones for mesh, so that you can have basically openings in it so it looks transparent when you put it on the outside of an object. So you get these different kinds of procedures that can be used for any given material that you've added or created for your project. So for our stone here, whichever you folks have is going to be fine. What we're going to do now is go over to page 9 in the notes, and what we want to do is change the digital picture that is being used to define our stone. Now, if you guys go to the share out folder for tonight, so that's the J drive for you. J and then BLDG and then 2805. In the session 11 folder, we've got some a couple of files in there that we need right now for setting up this stone. And these are the ones here, CSV 250T and CSV 250T bump. So these 2 files are needed now, so put them onto your desktop. So just copy them from the share out drive and then put them on your desktop. So what we're going to do now is we're going to modify the digital picture that's currently being used to render cultured stone. And to do that, if you click here where it says masonry stone unfinished, or whatever it is on your material, you'll see underneath the picture of the material some text that will turn blue when you put your cursor on it. And then it'll pop up a dialog box here. And so what we need to do is go up to the top here and go out to the desktop or wherever you've stored that digital picture and point it to that CSV 250T picture. There. So you guys can see we've got a different rendered appearance for the stone. Now, not only do we want to have this image here, we also want to talk about how big an area this picture represents. So once you've got the stone pointing at the right image, on the right hand side you'll see this little drop down menu. Choose Edit Image. So now in this dialog box here, Revit is asking, okay, here is the picture of this product. How big an area does this represent? So this digital picture, does it represent a 2-foot wide sample of this material, or is it 3 feet wide? So in this case, I think this actually represents probably somewhere between 30 and 36 inches. So I'm just going to say it's 36 inches of the material. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here, and you can see I've got scale. So I'm going to put in 36 inches, and this little lock icon here means it will maintain the proportions. So now it makes them both 3 feet. So now this one digital picture of this stone product represents 3 feet of wall area on the outside of the building, or wherever this stone is being used. So we're done. Now, we also need to bring in the relief pattern Now you folks might see it as bump. If yours says bump, that's fine, it does the same thing. Relief pattern and bump are both procedures to make the face of this you know, look recessed when you render it. So any parts where it's black here in these stones, this relief pattern or the bump will push those areas back once we get into rendering. So now what we've got to do is you hit the little blue text underneath the picture and go and point it to the CSV 250T bump. Now, of course, what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that this bump pattern also is being applied across the 3-foot size of our wall. So we have to hit edit image here as well. So right now what we have is our bump is being applied to a 2-foot wide swath of our wall, but our original image is being applied to a 3-foot, so that doesn't make sense. So here we need to make the scale 3 feet here as well. Now this is going to give you a really good example of how well these bumps or these relief patterns work. You folks can see how this little cube looks right now with the relief pattern. Watch what happens if I crank it up. It's going to make it appear rougher. Now watch what happens if I turn it off altogether. It just looks like a wallpaper, right? There's no realism to it. So when that bump or that relief pattern is turned back on, you get that extra roughness, and you can see an extra little bit of light here across the top of the brick. So again, it adds lighting and shadows to your surfaces of materials when you render it. So for things like carpet or carpet tile or interior finishes, you know, if you're using something like Shaw carpet, when you drill down to find the product that you're using, so let's say it's this product right here. If you go and choose one of their products, you'll see here there's a download high res. So this will allow you to get a high res picture of this carpet that you can then use to define your material in Revit. So you could create a material called carpet tile, you know, Shaw carpet, you know, whatever the name is. I think that was Nocturne or Shale, I'm not sure which one of these it is. So Shaw contract, carpet tile, district, Nocturne, make that as a material name, and then point your appearance asset for this new carpet to this digital picture of the carpet tile that you downloaded, and then you can have that all over the place on your flooring inside your project, and it'll look great. If you want it to be to look a little bit rougher, then make a copy of the image in grayscale and just bump up its contrast a little bit, and that's what we did. Here we've got the original image, but then in Photoshop I just changed the image to grayscale and took the contrast and cranked it way up, so we've got these areas here where we've got shadows, and those in turn, when we render it in Revit, become the bump map or the relief pattern that gives these things roughness when we render them. Now, one of the things that you should keep in mind is after you have defined these new materials and you want other people to use them in your office, that's all well and good, but just make sure that wherever you're storing those digital pictures that you're using for this material are someplace that all your colleagues can get at them. So don't put it on your own computer. You should have it on your server, and have it on a folder in your server that everybody can get access to. Not only that, what you should do in Revit, in the options dialog boxes, you just want to kind of tell Revit where these extra images are. So here under rendering, this render appearance paths. So if you've got a whole folder where these things are being stored, you can just add that extra folder where all this stuff is being placed. So here I'll just say it's on my desktop. See, and now it's adding that path, so Revit will never be able to forget about where this is. Now that's just for me. My desktop, of course, is not accessible by other people in the office, so this is a pretty useless place to store those images for use in renderings. So put those materials, put those digital pictures somewhere in a folder that everybody can get access to. Now let's go to page 10.
If by accident those pictures be deleted, is that based on forensic?
No, it's not stored in a project, ever. So all of the pictures that are used for rendering your projects are not stored in Revit's database. All of your families are. So if the original families on your computer get deleted, it doesn't matter. They're inside your Revit database. But all of the digital pictures that are used to define how your brick, your stone, your wood, how all of them appear, if they get deleted, it's going to render gray. Revit's not going to be able to show how those materials appear. So you got to make sure that you keep those files someplace and that you don't delete them. Okay, page 10. Now, I've made this lovely new cultured stone material. What I would like to do is share this with you so that you can get access to it and you can render with this cultured stone that I've taken the time to get ready for you. So down at the bottom here, oh no, that's not what I want. I want to create a new library that I can show you, or share with you rather. So what I do is this would be stored on my office's server. So I'm making this new material library that I'm calling the Office Shared Material Library. So I'd put this somewhere on my server so that everybody can get access to it. And now I'm going to have a new folder here. So here in this bottom library, when you hit this little home button and you expand it, it shows the out-of-the-box libraries from Revit, but it also shows this Office Shared Material Library. This is the one that I just added. Now what I can do is I can right-click on my newly created folder here, and I can choose Create Category. So this is kind of like creating a folder inside my new library, and I'll call it Stone. So this kind of replicates what happens with the out-of-the-box libraries, where if I expand it here, you can see there's all these different categories of materials that if I click on them, you know, there's stuff listed inside here. So I can do the same here. So I can add, right-click on it, add another category, create all these different categories for different kinds of materials. Now, once that's done, I can grab my cultured stone and bring it down and drop it into my stone library. And there it is.
How do you get that window?
This one here?
No.
This one here?
The home window.
Yes.
It doesn't show at the bottom. The bottom of home.
Oh, this one here.
This square.
Oh, I see.
See, right there. And you generally want this one on here, and you can size how much of the lower window is being seen. So there's one at the top here, which shows the library panel at the bottom, and then in that bottom window, it collapses or hides the side panel here, so you can browse through the different libraries. So this shared library that you make should also be stored on the server, and as you can see on page 10, it's got the file format ADISC lib, ADISC Autodesk library. Okay, one more thing to go through here, and then we'll be done for the evening, and we can take questions and work on a term assignment.
Excuse me, how did you add this response to the library?
Okay, so what I'm going to use now here, we're going to talk about walkthroughs. And I'm actually going to use the advanced sample project, which we've talked about before. And I think we used it, here we go. I'm just going to download this. So for dealing with our walkthroughs. So we're on page 11 of the notes here. So if you guys want to open up the advanced sample project from tonight's share folder, or if you've already got it because you guys did that work sets exercise on it last week, you can do that as well. Give you a couple minutes to grab that file and we'll move ahead. It is in a J drive. Yeah, it's in a share out folder. So if you're here, let me log into the other computer here so you folks can see it. So even here in your Windows, you can just type in J BLDG 2805. So here's our share out folder for the project, and in the session 11 folder you'll find the RAC Advanced Sample Project, which you can use for tonight's. And like I said, you've probably got from last week. You can get it from here as well. Advanced Sample Project. It's already in a 2018 format if you get it from the session 10 folder. So that could save you some time there as well. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about here are solar animations. Now, if you have a project where the shadows cast by the project are going to be a potential problem or a source of controversy, or whether it's just part of the natural approval process for your project, then you might have to do a shadow study. And for a lot of towers, shadow studies are required. Now I'm going to go to the 3D view here of this advanced sample project. And what we're going to talk about now are just the solar angles function that Revit provides. Down on the bottom here on the view control bar, so I'm in the 3D view, look for the sun icon. And if you click the sun, you can hit sun path on. So it's going to turn on this little sundial in the view. Now we're going to go to sun settings here. And this will allow us to configure our date and our geographic location for the project. So I'm going to go to single day here. And you can see here we're looking at March 22nd from 8:26 p.m. to 8:26 p.m. That's not very useful. Let's do sunrise to sunset. And you can see out of the box here there's a bunch of different presets for doing a solar study. So in this top preset here, in session single day, that just kind of allows you to make whatever settings you want. Below here, you could create a March 21st solar study. So this one here is in November. So here, there's one here for the summer solstice. So what you could do is create your own preset for a single day solar study. Choose your location like we discussed earlier. Choose the time of year where you want to get her done. And it'll show you your sunrise to sunset. So sunrise is at 4:09 a.m. and sets at 7 p.m. So let's move this to where we are. So for us, it's pretty much the same. Sunrise is at 4:09, sunset's at 7:23. So now when we hit OK, what we're going to actually see is the solar angle here. So if I just orbit the model around here, you can see the angle of the sun that it will pass through during the sky. And what you can do is you can actually grab the sun and drag it through the sky. Now, what's interesting is while you're dragging the sun, you guys might notice, look at that. What is it doing? Revit is actually showing you all the different possible sun locations for this project at all times during the year. And if you just drag the sun along the path, you're just changing the time of day. But if you drag the sun sort of perpendicularly, you can drag it downwards and you can change the date. Where do I do that here? I just can't remember where it was. I remember you can drag it. Oh, there it is there. I can go down to the bottom here and I can change the date. Now usually that's not what you're interested in. You're just interested in moving the sun around. And what will happen if you turn your shadows on now, you can see the shadows that will be cast by your building at different times of the day. So there it is, it's showing at 7:10 a.m. Here it's showing you your when sunset will take place, or sunrise rather. So I can drag the sun now down to the beginning. There it is, and there's sunrise. So you can see your shadows that are being generated. Now, if you switch to a different sun setting, say your winter solstice, now you're going to see that your solar angles are different. So your sun passes through this arc, and of course your sun is much lower in the sky. So first of all, you have to have your sun path on, and once your sun path is on, you can choose in sun settings here how it's all going to work. Now, one of the things that you're going to want to do here in the sun settings dialog box is change the interval. See, right now it shows the time interval is 1 hour. So when you do your sun study, it's just going to show where the sun is in 1 hour increments. It makes it quite choppy. So in the notes, going over to page 12, second paragraph, when you export the solar study to a video, exports your frames for the sun study at the interval you chose here. So make it 15 minutes. That's as short as you can get. So the sun jumps through the sky at 15-minute intervals. So in December 22nd, we go from 7:11 a.m. to 4:13 p.m. For our sunrise to sunset, and that's only 37 frames. So if you do 4 frames per second, that's about 12 seconds worth of a solar study. For your summer solstice, it's longer. 61 frames instead of 37. Not very many. So if you do 4 frames per second, that'll be over in about 15 seconds. So always set your time interval to 15-minute intervals. Now, what you can do from the sun settings dialog here, if you choose Preview Solar Study, now what happens is up here on the top of the ribbon, there's a play button. And now what will happen is that the sun will move through the sky at 15-minute intervals. So you can see there's the sun rising. And look at the shadows that are being generated on site. So now as the sun lowers in the sky, shadows are starting to get longer and longer. And down we go. So again, once you've got your sun path on and your sun settings sorted, and you've got shadows turned on, then when you click the sun settings button, you can choose Preview, and up at the top here it will have a play button so that you can run the sun through its paces and see how your shadows are generated based on the sun's angle. So now if you want to export this to a movie file, you can do so. Go up to the File menu and choose Export. And then choose, you got to go down a little bit here, scroll down to, whoops, File, Export. So right here, Images and Animations, Solar Study. File menu, Export, Images and Animations, Solar Study. So now you can choose the resolution of the video you want to make, and then hit OK. And then choose where you want this thing to be placed. And it'll take about 30 seconds or so for this file to get done. On larger ones it might take a little bit longer. A little bit here about codecs. If you find your file size is a bit big, you can download like the Logarith lossless codec or XVID or DivX. Any of these MPEG codecs work fine. There's some notes about that in the handout so you can decide which one you want to use. So now it's going to grind through and create that rendering for us. We're at 2%, 3%, 4%. It'll take a few seconds, but it'll send out that solar study as a movie file, which we'll see in a few moments. So you can do these solar studies from a orthographic 3D view like we've done here, or you can do it from a camera view as well. So if you want to be in a certain vantage point on the site and just see how the shadows are being cast. Most of the times for planning purposes, people are interested in these orthographic 3D views to do the solar study. Okay, so that's page 12. Now we're going to talk about creating a walkthrough. So now instead of animating the sun, we are going to animate the camera. So the process of creating a walkthrough, there's a few steps that you go through. The first one is to, you create the path of the camera. So when you create the walkthrough to begin with, the first step is creating the path of the camera as it flies through your project. Now I'll do all of this stuff in a 3D view of the project so that I can most easily manipulate the path of travel. So I click the top of the view cube, so I'm looking straight down and everything. And then I grab the walkthrough command. It's from the 3D view dropdown. Okay, so when you fire up the walkthrough command, what you're going to do is create the starting point for the camera's flight and then pick its path through the project. The path that you create is a spline. So I'm going to start here off the northeast corner of the site, and I'm just going to fly in kind of along the north side of the property here, clicking about every 10 or 20 meters. Click, 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 click. So I'm going to do one circuit of my building here, and then I'm going to come in here, so I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm going to come in through the front drive, and then I'm going to come in through the front door, and then I'm going to turn the corner and go down the corridor. Now I'm clicking about every 2 or 3 meters, and I'm going to come in between these two skylights on the ground floor, and I'm going to fly out through our entrance into the central courtyard. Then I'm going to do another loop here, and I'm going to turn around and come to a stop right here by these trees. Okay, so when you're done, you hit finish walkthrough. And what will happen if you go look in the project browser is that you get a walkthrough that's been added to your project browser. Now if you didn't have a walkthrough created before, this would be the only walkthrough that you would see in the list. And well, now what we want to do is we want to edit this walkthrough some more so we can adjust the path of the camera and a bunch of other stuff. So what you got to do is right click on walkthrough 1 and choose show camera. And up on the ribbon you will see edit walkthrough. Now there's 4 modes that you can edit on a walkthrough. You can see the drop down menu here on the options bar. Active camera, path, add, remove keyframes. Now active camera mode, which is the one that we're in right now, allows you to grab the camera from wherever it is and move it to a different location on the path of travel. Now what we need to do is adjust the targeting of the camera, because you folks can see that as this camera is flying down the line, where is it looking? It's looking down the path of travel. Now this is good. The camera is looking where it's going. Wish we could say that for all Vancouver drivers, right? So at any one of these red frames, now that's the keyframe, that's where you clicked. Each one of these keyframes you can grab the little purple dot and you can adjust the targeting of the camera. So now I want to aim it so that the camera is looking back at the building. So here when I go back to that earlier dot, again I need to have it at a keyframe, and now I can adjust the targeting of the camera. So I want to keep the camera always looking at the building. So I would have to do that for each one of those dots. So each one of those dots, that was each click that I made when I was making the path. I've got too many dots. That's crazy. So one of the modes here that we can choose is remove keyframe. So here if I choose remove keyframe, I can come in here and I can click these dots and I can remove them. I don't need nearly this many dots. There we go. So I've got a lot fewer dots now. So again, I'm going to switch back to the active camera mode here, so I can drag it to each one of these dots and just make sure the camera is always looking at the building. So drag the camera, stop. Drag the camera, target it at the building at each one of your keyframes. So this is obviously going to take a little bit of time to set up. You want to be careful when you are setting up your path of travel and setting up your targeting so that you do not give your viewers motion sickness. So if you're not careful with how you do your targeting, you can really make it a little bit nauseating for your viewers. So you want to be careful with that. Okay, so once you've satisfied that your targeting is more or less solid, what we're going to want to do here is deal with the path. Now here's why. I'm in 3D, right? I'm still in the 3D view, so even though I've clicked the top of the view cube to give myself a plan orientation of my path, I can now orbit and I can see where my path is going. Bad news, the first part of my fly-through would be like, Fantastic Journey. It would be under the ground. So what I want to do is, in path mode, take my first part of my fly-through and elevate it. So I can start dragging these spline points vertically so that I get the path of my camera out of the ground. So you can see here in 3D, you can grab all these different spline points and you can start moving them upwards so you get a little bit of elevation as the camera flies around the exterior of the project. Now you want to be careful that you don't turn this thing into a roller coaster either, right? So again, there's that motion sickness thing that you can induce in people who are watching the video, and you don't want to do that. Now, it's all right to have some transitions in elevation or to decrease or increase the elevation of the camera at different points throughout the walkthrough. Now, not only can you change the elevation of the camera here using the path mode, if I switch modes back to active camera, I can drag the camera to each keyframe. Now, at each keyframe, not only can we adjust the targeting of the camera from side to side, I want you to pay close attention here to what's going on. Now, here's the camera's location. We're at a keyframe. The pink dot, if I went to the top of the view cube, would be looking straight down, and I could take that pink dot and swing it from side to side to adjust the targeting of the camera. Now, when you're not in the top view and you're kind of looking at this thing from a different angle, notice that from this dot there is a stick which is emanating vertically upwards. This is telling you that the camera is elevated downwards from level. So now, right here, if I zoomed in on my camera, I could grab that little pink dot and drag it upwards, and look what's happening, that stick's getting shorter. Well, now the camera is looking horizontally. If I keep dragging it upwards, the stick will emanate downwards, and that means that the camera is looking up instead of looking down. Now, we probably wanted it to look down a little bit because we're flying in from above, so I'll leave it in that location. So anytime your camera is at one of these keyframes, you can adjust the camera's targeting from side to side, and you can also adjust the elevation of the camera up or down. So here, there's my pink dot. The stick is going upwards from there, so that means my camera is slightly elevated downwards. Now, at each one of those red dots, at each one of those keyframes, I can make a change in the speed of my camera. Now, as we come hauling in from off-site and as we whip around the outside of the building, you can probably keep a pretty decent speed. You know, like 50 or 60 kilometers an hour as you fly around the building. Now, Revit won't show your speed in those units. It uses meters per second. So something like, you know, anywhere from 5 to 10 meters per second would be fine. Now, of course, as we come around the corner and come towards the interior of our building, we need to drop the speed of the camera significantly, so you know people don't get this massive rush of you blowing through the front doors of the building. So to adjust the speed of the camera so it's not the same speed all the way through the walkthrough, down at the bottom here in the properties palette, when you've got the walkthrough selected, you can see walkthrough frames. So we're at 15 frames per second. It's 20 seconds long. We have 300 total frames. Now, generally speaking, you want your walkthroughs to be somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes, depending on the size of the project. So for a project of this size, you know, a 1-minute walkthrough would be sufficient. So if I want to do 60 seconds of walkthrough and I want to do 30 frames per second, which is normal, 60 times 30, 1,800. So I want a total of 1,800 frames. And I want 30 frames per second. Now, right now you can see our speed is 32 meters per second. Holy crap, that's fast. That is really, really fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off uniform speed. And now we will be able to adjust the speed of the camera at each one of these keyframes. No, actually it's showing me my total time is 20 seconds. I want it to be longer than that, so I'm going to go for 3,000 frames here. Oh no, I guess I was right. 1,800. I forgot to hit apply at the bottom. There we go. So it's going to be a 60-second long video. Now, each one of these keyframes is numbered on the left, so you can see it's 1 through 9. But of course, there's actually 31 keyframes. So what I need to do is figure out where I want to start slowing down the camera. So this is keyframe number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So maybe by about keyframe 14, I want to start slowing down the camera, and then 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. By about keyframe 18, I want to be really slow as I go through the building, and then I can speed up a little bit here, and then slow down again for the end of the walkthrough. So at 14, I'm going to start putting on the brakes. So I go up to 14 here, and I'm going to make the acceleration 0.8, and then 15.6. So there's 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So at 18, I really want to have things pretty slow. 0.4, 0.3, 0.2. So now I'm really slowing things down here. So 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So at 24, I can open things up a little bit again. So I'm just keeping it at a 0.2. And then here's 24, so I'll just punch it up a little bit again here, speed things up. So 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Okay, so for maybe these last ones here, I'll increase the speed a bit. And then as we come back to our video, its close, I will slow down the camera a bunch so that at the end it's quite slow. There we go. So at the end our camera is really kind of slowed down to a stop, and hit OK. So again, that is walk-through frames. You can find it here at the bottom. And we just got rid of the uniform speed, and we counted our keyframes to figure out where we should put the brakes on our walkthrough. Now, once we've got that done, we can open up the walkthrough and kind of get a sense of how it's going to look. Now, one of the problems right now is that my camera isn't seeing all the way into my model, and that's because of the far clip offset over here. So I'm just going to turn off the far clip for my walkthrough, and that way the camera can see infinitely into the model. Okay, so I've opened up walkthrough 1, so now what I want to do is preview it. So page 14, last paragraph there. Click the crop region and hit Edit Walkthrough. Now you'll notice up on the ribbon I can choose Play. So here we go. Oh, that's weird. It didn't. So here I'm just going to hit Escape. I want to start at frame 1. There we go. Okay. So here we're watching our. Now this won't necessarily render, it's not playing at its actual speed that you would see it at, and we'll talk about how you can make this into a movie format so it can be seen later by your clients. Now I don't think this is showing it at its total speed. There's a fair amount of geometry in there, so Revit is it's struggling to keep up here. So we're not obviously getting 30 frames per second. Now if we really wanted to see what was going on so we have a better sense of the true speed of this video, I'll show you a little trick here. So I'm going to go back to frame 1, but what I'm going to do in this video is I'm just going to turn on just the walls and the topography, just those two categories. And with just those two categories on here, and I'll turn on shading as well. Now when I edit the walkthrough and I run it, You can see Revit is going much faster here. It's still not 30 frames per second, but it will give us a better sense of you know, the speed of the camera and whether I've got the camera in the right spot. Now, I would say that my camera is too close to the building. I probably should take the path of my walkthrough and move it a little farther away. The other thing that I could do is I could grab the crop handles on the side and I could make it wider so we have a larger field of view. But really what I probably should do is go back and edit my walkthrough so that that part where I was coming along the side of the building, that I was farther away. This isn't too bad in terms of how far away from the building I am. I'm too close here, way too close. So this is a good idea, is to go through your preview and just, or go through your walkthrough and give it a preview with just maybe 1 or 2 categories on. So you can kind of get a sense of where the camera is and whether its location and path are appropriate. So now we're coming up to the front door. So we actually end up going right through the glass. You might want to make sure that the path of the camera does in fact pass through the doorway. So the camera has been slowed down. So as we enter the building now, the camera is slowing up. Now I'm going to bail out of this. Now when you do your walkthrough for real, again, you might want to turn off things like plumbing fixtures unless they're truly going to be in the view. You can render your view, not fully render it, but you can put yourself into realistic mode. So you can turn on shadows, you can turn on realistic mode, and what that'll do is it will turn on the foliage of your trees. So here in a few seconds, we'll see the grass texture or the grass appearance being shown here. Now this is quite dark. But we can go through and adjust the lighting settings, turn on shadows, and try and make this look as realistic as possible. So here I'm going to adjust the lighting, turn my sun up to 80% lighting, 60% ambient lighting, and just apply. And then I'm also going to turn on shadows. Now, this is going to chug pretty hard. So if you're going to do your walkthrough in realistic mode with shadows on, this could take all day for Revit to export. But once you've got your camera sorted, you've got the size of the camera view. So this shape right here, you want to maybe get that up so it's 16 by 9, so like a high-res movie. You can get the proportions of your crop region sorted. Again, you go to the export menu, file menu, export, images and animations, and then walkthrough. So here you can choose the resolution. So if you want to make it so that it's 720p, you can choose it there. So that's your basic high-res image. So 960 by 720, or if you want to go full 1080, there you go. So it'll be 1440 by 1080. And then hit OK. So like I said, this could take quite a long time for the render or for the walkthrough to complete. Doing it in full-on rendering mode, don't even bother. Revit's rendering engine isn't fast enough to do a fully rendered walkthrough. So that's just not a good use of your time. So go ahead and hit OK, and away Revit would go, and it would crank out that walkthrough. Okay, so that is all I'm going to cover for tonight. So we'll leave the rest of the night here for working on your term project and taking any questions that you might have.